I have always believed that a person's story doesn't truly begin at the moment they enter the world, but rather when they look back and start piecing together scattered memories, half-forgotten emotions, and faint impressions that slowly reveal why they became who they are. My name is Keanu Charles Reeves, and although people now say it easily, the name itself once felt like an echo from a place I barely understood. Keanu means cool breeze over the mountains in Hawaiian, a phrase that sounds poetic, almost mystical, yet my earliest years unfolded far from any stable mountain or cooling wind. Instead, my childhood was shaped by movement, separation, and uncertainty, a journey through impermanent homes and shifting landscapes. In many ways, I grew up like a traveler without a map, guided only by instinct and the quiet desire to find a place where I belonged. I was born on September 2nd, 1964, in Beirut, Lebanon. When I try to imagine the city of my birth, I mostly see it through photographs and old stories told by relatives. My parents met there during a moment of youthful spontaneity. My mother, Patricia, was an English woman with a talent for costume design and a restless spirit, while my father, Samuel, was an American of Hawaiian, Chinese, Portuguese, and English ancestry, a mix of cultures that, in a strange way, foreshadowed my own life of crossing borders and identities. Their relationship burned bright but fast, and by the time I was 3 years old, their paths had already split. I have only fragmentary memories of my father from those early years, moments that feel more like atmospheric impressions than clear recollections. What remained constant was my mother, who gathered me and my sister Kim and carried us forward into the unknown. Our lives became a series of relocations. From Beirut, we moved first to Sydney, Australia. I was far too young to process the significance of that move, but I do remember the sunlight, bright, sharp, almost innocent in its intensity. My mother worked wherever she could, stitching together not only costumes, but the fragile stability of our new life. I spent much of my early childhood in unfamiliar rooms, hearing different accents, adjusting to new faces, and learning, without realizing it, the ability to adapt quickly. It's a skill that later helped me as an actor, but back then, it was simply a matter of survival. After Sydney came New York City. The shift was jarring. The energy of New York was overwhelming, loud, relentless, always in motion. I felt small in that city of towering ambitions and constant noise. Still, it was a place where creativity thrived, and my mother was absorbed into the artistic world of costume work and theater wardrobes. She remarried during those years, and I suddenly had new father figures entering and leaving my life. Each stepfather brought a different personality, a different set of expectations, and a different version of what a family was supposed to be. I learned early on that adults were unpredictable and relationships fragile. But I also learned that life keeps moving, even when you don't feel ready. Eventually, we settled in Toronto, Canada, the city I consider my true childhood home. Compared to the whirlwind of our earlier moves, Toronto offered a sense of grounding. The seasons themselves taught me rhythm. Long winters that shaped my resilience, springs that hinted at renewal, summers filled with movement, and autumns marked by turning leaves and quiet reflection. I attended a series of schools there, partly because I sometimes struggled with traditional academics, partly because I was searching for a space where I could be myself. Dyslexia made reading a challenge, and I often felt out of sync with other students. I wasn't the quietest kid, but inside I carried a sense of distance, like I was watching life from the edges of the room. Despite these struggles, Toronto was where I discovered two passions that would define my future: hockey and acting. Hockey gave me a sense of belonging. When I stepped onto the ice as a goalie, everything else fell away. The instability of my early upbringing, the uncertainty about my place in the world, the academic frustrations in that cold rink, I found clarity. I loved the thrill of guarding the net, the responsibility, the focus, the quick decisions that determined the momentum of a game. For a while, I dreamed of becoming a professional player. That dream stayed with me longer than most childhood aspirations. And even today, I still feel that echo when I watch a game or hold a goalie stick. Acting, on the other hand, arrived quietly. I didn't recognize it as a calling at first. It began with school plays and small theater productions. I was drawn to the electricity of performance, the feeling of stepping into another world, speaking lines written by someone else, experiencing emotions I had yet to confront in my own life. Acting gave me permission to explore parts of myself that felt too vulnerable to express otherwise. When I was on stage, the noise of the outside world faded. I could breathe. I could exist fully in that moment. And for someone who grew up moving from place to place, the stage became one of the first places that actually felt like home. My teenage years were marked by contradictions. I was restless, yet introspective, confident on the ice but uncertain in classrooms. I was grateful for my mother's efforts and sacrifices, yet I often felt the weight of living in a house where transformations, emotional, financial, relational, were constant. Through all of this, I clung to acting. I enrolled in a performing arts school, but my time there was brief. I didn't fit the mold, and soon I was moving again, to yet another school, and then another. By the time I finally drifted away from the formal education system, I had attended several different high schools. For some people, these constant transitions might have felt like failures, but for me, they were steps toward a truth I didn't fully understand yet, that my path would never be traditional. What kept me anchored during those years was my relationship with my sister Kim. We were partners in the quiet struggle of childhood, supporting each other in ways only siblings can. When you grow up with instability, you learn to rely on the few constants you have, and she was one of mine. Watching her battle illness years later would become one of the most painful chapters of my life. But during those early years, she was my companion, my equal, my reminder that love can exist even when the foundations of life feel shaky. By the time I reached my late teens, I knew I wanted to be an actor, not because I was good at it, but because I felt alive whenever I performed. I worked odd jobs, saved what I could, and took acting classes when opportunities arose. The desire to perform became a steady flame inside me, one of the first things that hadn't been taken away by moves, separations, or changing circumstances. I didn't know then how far it would take me. I only knew that when I looked at my life so far, with its fractured beginnings, its unusual upbringing, its lack of stability, acting felt like the first choice that was truly mine. Looking back now, I realize that my name, Cool Breeze Over the Mountains, has followed me in more ways than one. My childhood was shaped by movement, unpredictability, and transitions. Yet through all of it, something in me remained calm, observant, drifting but determined. Like wind, I passed through different worlds without settling, yet each left a mark on me. And eventually, that drifting brought me toward the craft that would become my life's work. The instability that once felt like a burden eventually gave me the emotional depth, empathy, and openness I carried into every role I played. This, perhaps, is the true beginning of my story, not the day I was born, but the moment I realized that my fragmented childhood was not a weakness, but the foundation of everything I would become. The moment I left high school behind, a strange mixture of fear and freedom settled into my bones. Most of my friends were preparing for universities or trades, while I stepped into adulthood with nothing but a stubborn belief that acting could be my compass. I knew I wasn't academically inclined, and the idea of a conventional career didn't stir anything inside me. What kept pulling me forward was the memory of standing on a stage, hearing my own breath echo before the lights came up, and feeling that sudden bloom of awareness when I became someone else entirely. It was intoxicating. It was frightening. It was the first thing that felt unquestionably right, but wanting to become an actor and actually surviving long enough to do it are two separate challenges. Toronto was not known for launching international film careers, and I didn't have industry connections, influential mentors, or a carefully mapped network. What I had was persistence, a quiet, insistent voice telling me that even if the path was difficult, it was still mine to walk. So I began with whatever work I could find. My earliest jobs were simple, sometimes mind-numbing, but each one carried a sense of purpose because they all supported the same fragile dream. One of my first steady gigs was as a production assistant. I fetched coffee, swept floors, rolled cables, and set up lights under the watchful eyes of people who had spent years in the business. The work was physical and often underappreciated, but I treated every task like a lesson. Watching grips maneuver equipment or observing how directors communicated with actors taught me more about filmmaking than any formal training could have. I saw how patience, collaboration, and pressure shaped a set. I listened to arguments about lighting angles and narrative choices, and while I didn't say much, I absorbed everything, filing those details away for the future I hoped to build. Outside of these jobs, I auditioned for local theater productions, small commercials, and student films. Most auditions ended with polite rejections or no response at all, but I learned early not to take it personally. Casting decisions rarely reflect an actor's actual worth. Sometimes you're too tall, sometimes not expressive enough. Sometimes the casting director had a bad morning. Sometimes you simply don't fit the internal picture they've been holding on to. I reminded myself constantly that rejection was part of the job, that each no was another step toward the moment my skills aligned with someone's vision. During those years, Toronto's winter streets were my constant companions. I walked everywhere, partly because I didn't own a car, partly because the cold air cleared my mind. I rehearsed lines aloud while trudging through snowbanks, whispering dialogue into scarves and gloves. People probably thought I was talking to myself, but the city, in its quiet way, allowed me to exist without judgment. There's something comforting about anonymity. It gave me space to fail privately. Eventually, I secured small roles in Canadian television shows. They weren't glamorous jobs, but landing them felt like small miracles. My first script, my first on-camera close-up, my first awkward attempt to ignore the glaring presence of a microphone overhead, these were milestones that reassured me I wasn't chasing illusions. I remember one particular day on set when a director approached me after a scene and said, "You listen well, not all actors do." I didn't know whether he meant it as high praise or casual encouragement, but the words stayed with me. Listening, truly listening, became one of the foundations of my performance philosophy. Despite these small victories, I sensed that staying in Toronto would eventually limit my potential. The acting world, at least the one I dreamed of joining, existed elsewhere. The gravitational pull of Hollywood grew stronger each year, but the idea of leaving Canada frightened me. It meant severing the fragile stability I had finally found. It meant saying goodbye to friends who had become a makeshift family. Most of all, it meant stepping into a vast, competitive world where talent was abundant and luck often determined survival. Still, the decision formed slowly and inevitably. One night, after finishing a shift at a local theater, I walked along Bloor Street under a sky blurred with city lights. I felt an unfamiliar certainty rising inside me, an instinct that if I didn't take the risk soon, I might never take it at all. Within a few weeks, I gathered what little money I had saved, packed a single suitcase, and bought a one-way ticket to Los Angeles. I didn't know if I was chasing destiny or running blindly into chaos, but something in me understood that growth never happens inside comfort zones. Arriving in the United States as a young actor with limited resources is like stepping into a giant maze where every path looks promising until you realize it loops back on itself. I slept on friends' couches, shared cramped apartments with other dreamers, and learned the unspoken rules of auditioning in Hollywood. Be early, but not too early. Be confident, but not arrogant. Be memorable, but not outrageous. Most days, I traveled from one casting office to another, clutching headshots that looked far more composed than I felt. Some auditions lasted 5 minutes, some lasted 30 seconds. Some ended before I even spoke because the director took one glance at me and shook his head. But even in these moments, I refused to let discouragement sink its claws too deeply. I reminded myself of what I carried. Not only ambition, but resilience, born from a childhood filled with change. I was used to uncertainty. I knew how to navigate unfamiliar territory. And every rejection, while painful, sharpened my determination. I wanted not only to act, but to earn the right to call myself an actor. My early breakthroughs in the US came through sheer persistence and the kindness of people who believed in potential even before it was proven. I landed roles in modest films, features that didn't change the world, but changed my career. These small successes helped me secure an agent and get noticed by casting directors who handled larger projects. Each step forward reinforced the belief that I was finally carving a place for myself in an industry where countless others were trying to do the same. Around this time, I also learned the importance of humility. Hollywood had a way of inflating egos, and amplifying insecurities. Rising actors often felt pressure to project unwavering confidence, as if vulnerability might ruin their chances. But I found myself drawn to roles and relationships that required authenticity. I wasn't interested in pretending to be someone off camera just to maintain a certain image. My upbringing had been too unsteady to allow me to build a career on illusions. I wanted to be real, even if it made me seem quiet or aloof. One of the most transformative periods of my early adulthood involved understanding the emotional tools necessary for acting. It wasn't enough to memorize lines or hit marks. Acting demanded empathy, a willingness to inhabit the experiences, fears, and desires of another human being. My childhood, with all its transitions and losses, taught me how to observe people, how to sense the emotional current beneath their words. When I acted, I didn't draw from a well of technical training. I drew from lived experience. I knew what loneliness felt like. I knew the sting of separation. I knew the hunger to belong somewhere. These emotions, once overwhelming, became the core of my craft. At the same time, I made a promise to myself not to lose the parts of me that existed outside the film industry. I continued to play hockey whenever I could, found solace in playing bass guitar, and made friends who valued life beyond scripts and cameras. These anchors kept me grounded. Fame, I would later learn, can distort reality. But in those early years, I remained safely below the radar, navigating a world that was challenging but manageable. Looking back at that phase of my life now, I see a younger version of myself standing at the threshold of something vast and unpredictable. I didn't yet know the magnitude of the roles that would eventually define my career. I had no idea that franchises, iconic characters, and global recognition lay ahead. All I knew was that every day offered a new chance to prove myself, to refine my abilities, and to discover what kind of man I wanted to become. Those formative years, filled with late-night rehearsals, low-budget productions, shared apartments, and endless auditions, were a crucible. They shaped not only my craft, but my identity. They taught me endurance. They taught me patience. They taught me to trust that even when the path ahead looked uncertain, movement itself had value, step by step. I was building a foundation strong enough to withstand the storms that success would one day bring. And although I couldn't see the future, I felt a quiet confidence that I was moving in the right direction, guided, once again, like the breeze my name described, restless, persistent, and always searching for the next open door. When I look back at the earliest stages of my film career, what stands out most vividly isn't the excitement of being on camera. It's the fragile uncertainty that accompanied every opportunity. Hollywood is a place of contrast, shimmering lights at night, harsh sunlight during the day, and beneath both, the silent anxiety shared by thousands of hopeful actors trying to carve out a future. I was one of them, carrying little more than ambition, gratitude for any chance that came my way, and a stubborn belief that storytelling mattered. I knew I wasn't famous, experienced, or exceptional in the traditional sense. But I also knew that authenticity has its own kind of power, and I hoped it would be enough to open a few doors. My first meaningful film roles came in the mid-1980s. One of the earliest was a teenage hockey movie called Youngblood, 1986, where I had a small but memorable role as a French-Canadian goalie. The part wasn't glamorous, but it felt like destiny winking at me, my childhood passion for hockey merging with the career I was trying to build. I still remember the strange sense of coming full circle the moment I stepped onto the ice for the first scene. The cold air, the sharp scrape of skates, the adrenaline of guarding a net again. It was a reminder that life's paths sometimes loop back on themselves in unexpected ways. More importantly, working on that film taught me something crucial. Professionalism matters. Even as a supporting actor with limited screen time, I saw how much trust is exchanged on a set. Every person, from the grips to the wardrobe team to the producers, relies on others to deliver. A film is a living organism made of hundreds of beating hearts. If one person falters, everyone feels it. I learned to arrive early, stay humble, and treat every scene like a privilege. These lessons stayed with me through every phase of my career. Soon after, more auditions led to more roles. The projects varied: teen dramas, small independent features, darker coming-of-age stories. but each one shaped my understanding of character work. One film that marked a turning point was River's Edge, 1986. It was a raw, unsettling story about disaffected youth, loyalty, and moral apathy. The atmosphere on set was intense, and the subject matter demanded emotional honesty. Filming it opened parts of my psyche I hadn't accessed before. It was the first time I felt the true weight of carrying a character's internal world on my shoulders. The experience didn't just push my craft, it matured me. Then came the film that would unexpectedly redefine my public image for an entire generation, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, 1989. When I auditioned for the role of Ted Logan, I didn't overthink it. I approached the character with openness, curiosity, and a genuine sense of playfulness. Ted wasn't complicated or brooding. He wasn't caught in emotional storms or existential dread. He was simply earnest, enthusiastic, well-meaning, and wonderfully oblivious. Stepping into his shoes felt like inhaling a breath of fresh, uncomplicated air. What I didn't anticipate was how deeply audiences would connect with Bill and Ted's joyful energy. Their optimism was infectious, their friendship sincere, and their worldview refreshingly simple. The film became a surprise hit, and suddenly people recognized me on the street, not as Keanu, the aspiring actor, but as Ted, the time-traveling, guitar-strumming half of a slacker duo. Fans approached me with wide smiles, quoting lines in exaggerated surfer accents, sometimes shaking their heads as if they couldn't believe I existed outside the character. I took it all with gratitude, though a part of me worried about being typecast. I didn't want my future to be defined solely by air guitar and cheerful confusion. Hollywood loves to box people in. Once you succeed in something, the industry often wants you to replicate it. After Bill and Ted, I received countless scripts featuring characters strikingly similar to Ted, movies about good-natured slackers, goofy best friends, carefree teenagers floating through life. While I appreciated the opportunities, I also felt a growing urge to explore deeper emotional terrain. Acting, for me, wasn't just about fun. It was about connection, empathy, and transformation. I knew I needed roles that challenged me, not ones that comforted casting directors. One film that helped shift perceptions was Parenthood, 1989, directed by Ron Howard. I played Todd, a kind-hearted young man dealing with the complexities of love, insecurity, and broken families. The role allowed me to tap into vulnerability without relying on jokes or exaggerated gestures. Ron Howard approached me with trust, offering guidance while encouraging authenticity. That experience taught me the value of working with directors who see beyond surface impressions. Todd wasn't Ted. He wasn't an archetype. He was a young man trying to navigate life's emotional turbulence, something I deeply understood. As the 1990s approached, I found myself torn between gratitude for the opportunities I had and an undercurrent of fear that my career might stagnate if I didn't break away from comedic roles. I began saying no more often, a difficult choice for someone still finding his footing, but I knew I needed to honor my artistic instincts. Saying no became an act of self-preservation. Then came a script that changed everything, Point Break, 1991. When I read the role of FBI agent Johnny Utah, I felt an immediate jolt of excitement. The film blended adrenaline-fueled action with philosophical undertones. It wasn't simply a story about crime. It was about freedom, loyalty, and the seductive pull of danger. Playing Johnny Utah required discipline, physical training, and emotional depth. Under Catherine Bigelow's direction, the film turned into an intense but exhilarating experience. The surf culture, the dangerous stunts, the dynamic with Patrick Swayze, all of it pushed me to evolve as an actor. Point Break marked the beginning of a new chapter, but the true breakthrough came shortly after with My Own Private Idaho, 1991, directed by Gus Van Sant. I played Scott Favor, a privileged young man drifting through unconventional spaces, friendships, and self-discoveries. The film was tender, poetic, and deeply human. Collaborating with River Phoenix on that project remains one of the most significant experiences of my career. River brought sensitivity and spirit to every moment, and working alongside him pushed me to embrace vulnerability in ways I hadn't before. The film didn't just stretch my craft, it touched something spiritual in me. It reminded me why I chose acting in the first place. to reveal humanity in all its contradictions. After my own private Idaho, something shifted. Critics began acknowledging my range. Casting directors reconsidered their assumptions. Filmmakers who once saw me only as Ted now recognized the possibility of something more. Slowly, doors opened to projects with depth and complexity. But with these new opportunities came heavier responsibilities. I found myself drawn to action films not just for the spectacle, but for the discipline they required: martial arts training, weapons practice, physical conditioning. All of it grounded me. Training became meditative. Almost like a form of therapy, I learned to respect the craft of stunt performers, whose dedication often goes unrecognized. Their precision, courage, and endurance inspired me. I made a promise early on to perform as many of my stunts as safely possible, not out of recklessness, but out of respect for the authenticity it brought to each character. The next pivotal moment arrived with Speed, 1994. When I first read the script, I knew the concept was wild. A bus rigged with explosives, a bomb that would detonate if the speed fell below 50 miles per hour, and two unlikely heroes trapped inside with dozens of terrified passengers. But beneath the high-octane premise was a story about courage, improvisation, and human resilience. Sandra Bullock brought warmth, humor, and charm to the film, and our chemistry helped ground the intensity. We didn't expect Speed to become a cultural phenomenon, but it did. Overnight, I became associated with action roles, serious, focused, determined characters who faced danger head-on. Success, however, carries its own kind of weight. I felt grateful, but I also sensed the industry sharpening its expectations. People wanted bigger explosions, more stunts, faster pacing. I knew that if I wasn't careful, I could get trapped again. This time, in the image of the heroic action star instead of the goofy slacker. Neither box felt entirely right. I wanted freedom to explore both action and introspection, comedy and tragedy, blockbuster energy and indie subtlety. So I made another difficult choice. I turned down Speed 2. Many people thought I was out of my mind. The studio didn't take it lightly. Friends questioned my decision, but I followed my instincts. I didn't feel connected to the story, and I couldn't commit to a project simply because it promised commercial success. Some interpreted my refusal as rebellion. In truth, it was self-respect. These early years of my career taught me lessons I still hold close. I learned that success can be both a blessing and a trap. I learned that integrity isn't always easy, but it's necessary. I learned that fear can be a guide rather than an obstacle. And I learned that every role, whether comedic, dramatic, or action-driven, has the potential to teach me something new about humanity. By the time the mid-1990s arrived, I stood on the edge of a career that was beginning to expand in unexpected directions. What I didn't know was that soon a script would land in my hands that would alter the trajectory of my life, reshape cinematic history, and introduce me to a character whose name would echo through decades. But that story, one involving virtual worlds, philosophical awakenings, and a journey into the heart of destiny, belongs to the next chapter. By the late 1990s, I felt as though I had walked through a dozen different versions of Hollywood, each with its own rhythm, pressures, and expectations. I had played surfers, cops, drifters, lovers, and wanderers. Yet I sensed a looming shift in my career, something that would require more than physical training or emotional vulnerability. I didn't know what form it would take, only that a quiet anticipation had begun to grow in me. Then one day, a script arrived that felt like a doorway into another universe. It was titled The Matrix. When I first read the screenplay, I felt disoriented in the best possible way. The pages were filled with philosophical questions, impossible imagery, and a strange blend of cyberpunk grit and spiritual searching. It wasn't just a story about machines and rebellion. It was about reality, identity, and the quiet terror that perhaps the world we trust is nothing more than an illusion. I remember finishing the script late at night and sitting in silence afterward, letting the ideas settle. Something inside me whispered that this was no ordinary project. It was a challenge, one that demanded I step into unknown territory. Meeting the Wachowski siblings only strengthened that feeling. They spoke about simulation theory, mythology, martial arts philosophy, and technology with a rare combination of intelligence and passion. Their vision wasn't just creative, it was revolutionary. They weren't interested in making another action movie. They wanted to change how stories were told on screen. I felt drawn to their conviction, moved by their clarity, and inspired by the way they treated filmmaking like a form of spiritual inquiry. The role of Neo resonated with me immediately. He was an outsider, a quiet observer drifting through life, longing for truth but afraid of what it might reveal. I understood that sense of searching, of feeling that the world had layers hidden beneath its surface. Neo's journey from uncertainty to awakening mirrored my own internal evolution as an actor and a person. Accepting the role felt instinctive, almost inevitable. Training for the film became one of the most intense experiences of my life. Before cameras rolled, we spent months learning martial arts, wire work, weapons handling, and choreography that demanded both precision and endurance. I trained alongside Lawrence Fishburne, Carrie-Anne Moss, and Hugo Weaving, actors who pushed themselves with relentless dedication. Their commitment fueled my own. I suffered injuries, strained muscles, and exhausted days, but every challenge reminded me that extraordinary stories require extraordinary effort. On set, the world of The Matrix felt alive in a way I had never encountered before. The green-tinted lighting, the stark contrast between the real world and the digital prison, the iconic costumes, it all combined into a distinctive atmosphere that seeped into our performances. The Wachowskis communicated with clarity and trust, inviting us to explore our characters' emotional depths, even within the confines of a hyper-stylized universe. I felt myself growing not just as an actor, but as a thinker, questioning the nature of reality, fate, and choice. The moment we filmed the rooftop bullet dodge scene, I sensed we were part of something unprecedented. The bullet time camera system, the slow motion effects, the wire stunts. These innovations felt like glimpses into the future of filmmaking. But my favorite moments were quieter. Neo's hesitant questions, Morpheus's calm wisdom, Trinity's silent strength. The film wasn't carried only by spectacle, it was anchored by human yearning. When The Matrix premiered in 1999, its impact exceeded anything we had imagined. Audiences embraced it not merely as entertainment, but as a cultural phenomenon. People debated its philosophy, referenced its imagery, and quoted its lines with reverence. Suddenly, my name became intertwined with Neo's in a way I hadn't experienced with any previous role. It was surreal, humbling, and slightly overwhelming. Yet more than anything, I felt grateful. The film had given me space to explore ideas I cared about, and in return, it had opened doors I never knew existed. The success of The Matrix also changed how the industry looked at me. For the first time, I was associated with a character who embodied introspection as much as action. Neo wasn't a traditional hero. He didn't swagger or boast. He questioned, hesitated, doubted, and those qualities made him relatable. Playing him reminded me that strength often grows from vulnerability rather than confidence. Filming the sequels, Reloaded and Revolutions, brought even greater challenges. The physical demands increased, the choreography became more elaborate, and the emotional stakes deepened. But the experience strengthened the bonds among the cast and crew. We were no longer just colleagues. We were explorers, navigating a world we had helped bring to life. Each film expanded the mythology, pushing us to question not only our characters' destinies, but our own. When the trilogy finally concluded, I felt a mixture of exhaustion, pride, and melancholy. Neo had been part of my life for years. Letting go of him felt like releasing a piece of my own journey. Yet I also understood that stories must end so that new ones can begin. The Matrix transformed my career, but more importantly, it expanded my understanding of storytelling itself. It taught me that film can be a mirror, a question, and a doorway all at once. As the world celebrated the trilogy and debated its meaning, I quietly returned to work, grateful for the adventure, but ready to step into new roles. Even though I didn't yet know what awaited me, I sensed that the next phase of my life, both as an actor and a human being, would be shaped by everything The Matrix taught me, and in many ways, I was right. After the Matrix trilogy propelled me into a new level of visibility, life shifted in ways I couldn't fully anticipate. Fame doesn't arrive gently. It strikes like a sudden burst of light, illuminating everything around you while casting your private struggles into deeper shadows. Outwardly, I appeared to be entering a golden period of my career. Inwardly, I was bracing myself against tragedies that would reshape the core of who I am. For many years, I lived with a sense of emotional quietness that came from constant movement during my childhood. I learned to adapt, adjust, and keep going, but nothing prepared me for the heartbreak that unfolded at the end of the 1990s. My partner at the time, Jennifer Syme, and I had been expecting a daughter. We had chosen her name, Ava, and imagined a future filled with late-night feedings, lullabies, and mornings softened by newborn cries. But life, unpredictable and unforgiving, took a turn we could neither escape nor understand. Ava was stillborn. The silence that followed that moment was heavier than anything I had ever known. The loss fractured something inside both of us. Grief doesn't follow a logical path. It hits in waves, sometimes violently, sometimes quietly, always unpredictably. Jennifer and I drifted apart, not out of anger, but because sorrow often isolates rather than unites. We were two people trying to survive a storm that had no center. I tried to throw myself into work, hoping that structure and routine could keep me standing. Yet every set I walked onto felt strangely hollow, as though a part of me was missing. Then, in 2001, tragedy struck again. Jennifer died in a car accident. When I received the news, I felt the world tilt beneath me. Losing her so soon after losing our child left a wound that time didn't know how to heal. People often imagine that actors live insulated lives, protected by fame or wealth, but grief doesn't care about status. It crawls into the quiet spaces of your soul and lingers. I carried that pain with me silently, not because I wanted to hide it, but because some emotions are too raw to articulate. These experiences changed me profoundly. They made me more patient, more compassionate, and more aware of the fragility of every moment. I learned that the people we love become part of our inner landscape, shaping us long after they're gone. I also understood that work, while helpful, cannot replace what the heart loses. Acting gave me purpose, but healing required solitude and honesty. During this period, I focused intensely on supporting my sister, Kim, who was battling leukemia. Watching her fight the disease with bravery taught me what real strength looks like. I visited her regularly, sat beside her during treatments, and tried to make her laugh even when her energy faded. Her resilience inspired me to keep moving, even on days when getting out of bed felt like lifting a mountain. Financially, I did what I could to ease her journey. Emotionally, I tried to be steady, a role I hadn't always been able to play in other parts of my life. Her illness taught me the value of presence, the simple act of showing up for someone without expecting anything in return. Through her struggle, I also became more involved in supporting cancer research in children's hospitals. I didn't want recognition for these efforts. I wanted change, hope, and better outcomes for families facing what ours was facing. Professionally, the early 2000s were a mix of diverse projects. I worked on films like The Replacements, Sweet November, and Constantine, each offering a different kind of escape and exploration. Constantine, in particular, gave me the chance to embody a character wrestling with moral ambiguity, guilt, and redemption. Playing someone who battled inner demons felt strangely cathartic. The film's darker elements allowed me to channel emotions I hadn't yet processed fully. Despite the growing success, I tried to maintain a simple life. I took the subway, walked through cities anonymously when I could, and found comfort in quiet routines. Fame creates distance between people, but I always valued the small human interactions, holding a door for someone, sharing a conversation with a stranger, enjoying a cup of coffee without being watched. These moments grounded me. As the decade progressed, I also reconnected with music. Dogstar, the band I played bass for, had always been a creative sanctuary. Touring Europe and Japan with them reminded me of the joy of collaboration outside the film world. Music has a way of cutting through emotional complexity and offering something pure. Standing on stage with friends, feeling the vibrations of the crowd, gave me a sense of freedom I didn't always feel in front of a camera. Around this time, I also directed my first film, Man of Tai Chi. The project had been a dream for years. I loved martial arts, not just as an action tool, but as a philosophy of discipline and balance. Directing allowed me to step behind the scenes, to guide a story from conception to screen, and to honor the traditions of the art form. It was demanding, exhausting, and exhilarating. I discovered a new kind of fulfillment in shaping the emotional and visual tone of a film, and I gained a deeper respect for the directors who had guided me throughout my career. Yet through all the creative progress, grief remained a companion, sometimes distant, sometimes looming, always present. I learned to carry it gently, to let it reshape me rather than destroy me. Suffering doesn't disappear, but it can evolve into understanding. It can soften edges, deepen empathy, and strengthen resolve. By the time I approached my late 40s, I felt like someone who had walked through fire and emerged quieter, humbler, but still standing. Life had taken people I loved and given me new paths to walk. One of those paths would soon lead me back into the world of action films, into a role that would ignite a new chapter of my career in ways I could never have predicted. But that turning point began with a simple script about a hitman mourning his wife and the dog she left behind. By the early 2000s, I felt my career resting in a quiet, almost meditative space. I had worked for decades, crossed genres, explored characters from wandering souls to demon hunters, and built a resume that stretched across continents and philosophies. Yet something inside me sensed a shift approaching, an instinctive whisper that I was about to enter a new creative decade that demanded not only skill, but a complete transformation of body and mind. That transformation arrived in the form of a script titled John Wick. At first glance, it seemed like a straightforward revenge story, a retired hitman returning to violence after the one peaceful part of his life is torn away. But the more I read, the deeper the emotional core revealed itself. John wasn't just a skilled assassin. He was a grieving husband, a man holding on to the final gift from his wife, a puppy named Daisy, like a lifeline. When that fragile connection was destroyed, it wasn't merely an act of violence. It was an assault on his last thread of humanity. I understood that grief intimately. I understood love as memory and loss as a void. And I felt a deep responsibility to portray John not as an action figure, but as a broken man rediscovering a part of himself he wished had stayed buried. Working with Chad Stahelski and David Leitch, two stunt performers turned filmmakers with extraordinary vision, broadened my perspective on action cinema. Their approach wasn't about spectacle for its own sake. It was about discipline, rhythm, intention, and the physical language of storytelling. They created a world where gunfights felt like choreography, where martial arts moved like dance, and where the camera served as an extension of the characters' emotional states. Their respect for stunt teams, martial artists, and fight choreographers resonated with everything I valued. Training for John Wick became one of the most demanding preparations of my career. Hours turned into weeks, weeks into months. I learned judo throws, jiu-jitsu submissions, close-quarters gun handling, and the seamless transition between weapons and hand-to-hand combat. My body protested, then adapted, then strengthened. I spent day after day on shooting ranges, working through magazine changes, reloads, and movement drills designed to build muscle memory until the weapons felt like extensions of my hands. I enjoyed the process. There was discipline in repetition, clarity in exhaustion, and purpose in each perfected motion. Filming the first movie felt like discovering a lost part of myself. John Wick was precise, quiet, wounded, focused, qualities that aligned with some of the most private parts of my nature. When the cameras rolled, I didn't feel like I was revisiting familiar territory. I felt like I was being reintroduced to a version of myself that had been tucked away beneath the grief, experiences, and roles of earlier decades. Action films often emphasize external conflict, but John Wick thrived on internal wounds. His silence spoke volumes. His violence was mournful, not celebratory. We released the film in 2014 with modest expectations. It wasn't designed to dominate box offices or generate a massive franchise. It was a passion project built by people who believed in craft and authenticity, but audiences responded with unexpected enthusiasm. They connected with John's grief, admired his precision, and became fascinated by the hidden world of assassins governed by strange rules, gold coins, and ancient codes. Suddenly, John Wick wasn't just a movie. It was the beginning of something bigger. The success brought an energy I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't about fame. It was about discovery. About finding a new creative space that allowed me to combine emotional storytelling with physical expression. When we moved forward with John Wick. Chapter 2. The world expanded. Chad and the entire stunt team pushed the choreography further, crafting sequences that required intense coordination and months of preparation. Every punch, throw, and shot had intention. We trained harder, filmed longer, and refined every movement with respect for the physical language of action cinema. By the time we reached Chapter 3, Parabellum, the character had evolved into a mythic figure, a man fighting not only for survival, but for redemption. The stakes grew larger, the universe richer, and the action more elaborate. I felt both the weight and the joy of carrying such a character across multiple films. Each chapter demanded more from my body, but also gave more to my spirit. It reminded me that reinvention is always possible, no matter where you stand in your career. Throughout these years, I also found personal renewal. I embraced collaboration with artists who inspired me and built friendships that brought comfort and laughter back into my life. I continued supporting my sister, spending time with musicians, and exploring new creative outlets. The success of John Wick didn't fix old wounds, but it helped me rediscover momentum. It reminded me that even when life breaks you, there are pathways back into light. Some built through perseverance, others through unexpected opportunities. But the greatest gift the franchise gave me was purpose. John Wick wasn't a superhero. He was a man surviving pain. His story resonated because it reflected truths so many people carry silently. When fans approached me and said the films helped them through grief, hardship, or loneliness, I felt humbled. Art can comfort, and sometimes it reaches people when words cannot. As the world embraced John Wick, I felt a new chapter forming, one defined not by the past pain or the roles that came before, but by the possibility of continuing to grow as an artist, a collaborator, and a human being. The warrior may have been born on screen, but the resilience he taught me extended far beyond it. In the years following the rise of John Wick, I found myself in a strangely peaceful phase of life. Hollywood can be unpredictable. One moment you're at the center of conversation, the next you're a quiet shadow passing through a world of flashing cameras and whispered gossip. Yet for the first time in a long while, I felt content moving in that space between the spotlight and stillness. Success didn't stir a hunger for more fame. Instead, it gave me room to breathe, to reflect, and to rediscover passions that had been waiting patiently in the background. One of those passions was music. Long before audiences knew me as Neo or John Wick, I was simply a young guy playing bass in a band with friends, finding rhythm in dim rehearsal rooms and smoky clubs. Dogstar had taken a long hiatus, but as the years passed, the idea of returning to music resurfaced naturally, not as a career move, not as a publicity strategy, but as a quiet call from a part of my spirit that still resonated with low frequencies and the vibration of strings. When we reunited to jam again, something clicked. The music wasn't polished or perfect, but it was honest. I remembered what it felt like to lose myself in sound, to connect with others through pure collaboration rather than dialogue from a script. There's a humility to music, an acceptance that the note played in the wrong moment can be just as meaningful as the one struck perfectly. As Dogstar made its return, touring and recording new material, I felt gratitude for this unexpected revival. People sometimes assume acting is my main identity, but music remains one of the truest expressions of who I am. During this period, I also nurtured creative impulses that had nothing to do with performance. I revisited the world of graphic storytelling through BRZRKR, a comic series I co-created. The idea had lived in my imagination for years, a semi-immortal warrior struggling with violence, identity, and purpose. It held themes that echoed my own reflections on endurance and humanity. Working with talented artists and writers allowed me to explore storytelling in a more visual, visceral way than film alone. Seeing readers connect with the world we built reaffirmed my belief that creativity thrives when curiosity leads the way. Yet, as much as I enjoyed these artistic pursuits, I also valued the quiet routines that anchored my life outside work. I rode my motorcycle, sometimes aimlessly, letting the hum of the engine guide my thoughts. Something about the open road resets my mind. The wind becomes a companion, the landscape a silent therapist. Riding is one of the few places where fame disappears. A helmet hides identity, and speed turns the world into a blur, devoid of judgment or expectation. Some people meditate cross-legged in a room. I meditate at 70 miles per hour with the horizon unfolding ahead. At the same time, I remained committed to philanthropy, though I rarely spoke about it publicly. To me, charity is most meaningful when it is quiet, an act of kindness without the need for a spotlight. My sister's battle with illness had opened my eyes to the emotional and financial strain families face when confronting medical crises. Over the years, I supported cancer research in children's hospitals not for recognition, but because I understood the desperation and hope that coexist in hospital rooms. If my resources could ease that burden for others, then I felt an obligation to help. During this quieter chapter of my life, I also experienced a profound shift in my personal relationships. I met Alexandra Grant, a brilliant artist, collaborator, and partner who understood the rhythms of creativity and solitude in ways few people do. Our friendship grew naturally, built on shared interests, philosophical conversations, and mutual respect for each other's inner lives. When our relationship became public, I was surprised by the outpouring of support. I've always valued privacy, but I also learned that happiness doesn't need to be hidden to be protected. Being with someone who encourages authenticity rather than performance brought warmth back into corners of my life I had long kept dim. Professionally, the years continued to offer unexpected opportunities. I reprised roles in franchises audiences loved, navigated new projects, and collaborated with filmmakers whose visions challenged and inspired me. Yet I noticed something fundamental within myself, a shift from chasing outcomes to embracing processes. I no longer acted to prove something. I acted because I loved the transformation, the emotional exploration, the communal craft of filmmaking. Every set became a temporary home, every crew a brief family, every character a mirror reflecting something I needed to examine. But fame, even when managed carefully, has a way of circling back. The rise of memes, internet culture, and social media transformed the way audiences connected with actors. Suddenly, I found myself labeled the internet's boyfriend, a title more humorous than accurate, but rooted in affection. People celebrated my small gestures, giving up a subway seat, signing autographs respectfully, letting others walk ahead. I didn't do those things for attention. I did them because my mother raised me to treat people kindly. Yet the world magnified these moments into symbols of decency, and while I felt flattered, I also felt humbled. In a culture hungry for authenticity, simple acts of humanity become extraordinary. Still, no matter how many headlines surfaced, I stayed focused on the work and the relationships that grounded me. I learned to let go of what I couldn't control, opinions, assumptions, or narratives built by strangers. Life is too short to chase every ripple in the public consciousness. I chose instead to invest in my craft, my loved ones, and the quiet moments that make existence meaningful. As this chapter of reinvention unfolded, I realized something profound. The most important transformations don't happen in the spotlight. They happen in silence, during the late-night motorcycle rides, the quiet rehearsals with a bass guitar, the soft conversations with someone you love, the introspective moments when you confront the shadows of your past. And though the world knew me for roles filled with chaos, violence, and action, the truth is that the deepest changes in my life happened in stillness. As the John Wick series continued gaining momentum, a surprising byproduct emerged. My creative world began expanding in ways I hadn't anticipated. Opportunities flowed from unexpected corners: video games, animation, indie films, international productions. It felt as though every aspect of storytelling was calling out to me. For the first time in my career, I stepped into multiple mediums, not because I felt pressured to stay visible, but because curiosity led me forward. One of the most memorable invitations came from the gaming world. When CD Projekt Red approached me about joining Cyberpunk 2077, I wasn't entirely sure what to expect. I'd played games before, but I'd never imagined embodying a character inside a digital universe. The idea of lending my voice, appearance, and presence to a sprawling cyberpunk world felt strange and thrilling. After reading about Johnny Silverhand, a rebellious, enigmatic rocker turned revolutionary, I felt drawn to his contradictions. He was chaotic but purposeful, flawed but charismatic, someone whose ideals clashed violently with his methods. Characters with sharp edges are always interesting to me. Recording for the game was unlike anything I had experienced. Instead of sets, cameras, and physical choreography, there were microphones, motion capture suits, and scripts that branched into dozens of narrative pathways. The work demanded imagination on a new level, reacting emotionally to environments and characters that didn't yet exist visually. It pushed me to expand my range, to adapt my acting instincts to spaces built entirely from code. When my involvement was revealed at E3, the audience reaction stunned me. Hearing thousands of people cheer wasn't something I expected from the gaming community, yet their enthusiasm reminded me that stories transcend medium. Whether on a screen or in a virtual world, connection is connection. Around the same time, I found myself gravitating toward projects that didn't fit comfortably into any single category. I collaborated with independent filmmakers whose visions felt intimate and daring. I participated in documentaries exploring the human spirit, technology, and art. I lent my voice to animated films, discovering that expressiveness takes on unique dimensions when condensed into vocal performance alone. The diversity of these experiences reinvigorated me. It proved that growth isn't limited by age or previous success. It's limited only by your willingness to explore. As my creative life expanded, so did my appreciation for collaboration. I've always believed that filmmaking, and storytelling in general, is a team effort. But in these years, I gained a deeper understanding of just how many hands, minds, and hearts shape a project. In motion capture sessions, I watched animators translate tiny gestures into expressive digital movement. On indie sets, I saw small crews create magic with limited budgets. In concerts with Dogstar, I stood beside my bandmates and felt the raw bond between musicians sharing a stage. These experiences reminded me that art thrives on trust, humility, and the willingness to listen. Still, amid all the creative exploration, I guarded my private life carefully. The more the world expanded around me, the more I valued the quiet sanctuary of home. I spent time reading philosophy, writing ideas in notebooks, and grounding myself in routines that felt ordinary but essential. I cooked soups, watered houseplants, and enjoyed walks with no destination. There is immense peace in the mundane, peace that keeps the soul steady when public attention sways unpredictably. My relationship with Alexandra also deepened during these years. She wasn't interested in the noise of fame. She was interested in ideas, art, and honest connection. Our partnership grew from a foundation of respect and shared curiosity. Creativity flowed easily between us. We encouraged each other's projects, supported each other's solitude, and found humor in life's unpredictable turns. Being with someone who understands both the intensity and fragility of creative work taught me to appreciate companionship in a new way. Love, I learned, doesn't need grandeur to be meaningful. It thrives in sincerity. Professionally, I continued stepping into roles that challenged me. I returned to the Matrix universe for The Matrix Resurrections, a journey that felt like revisiting an old home that had been rebuilt with new architecture. Neo had aged, and so had I. Both of us carried new scars, deeper understanding, and a quieter approach to conflict. The Wachowskis once again invited me into a narrative dense with symbolism, emotion, and questions about identity filming. It reminded me of the early days, the passion, the experimentation, the hunger to explore boundaries. Reuniting with Carrie Ann Moss was profoundly moving. We had grown as people and as artists, yet the connection between our characters felt timeless. As I navigated this expanding creative universe, I also reflected on the longevity of my career. Many actors fear aging in Hollywood, but I saw it differently. Age brought depth. It brought new types of roles, new audiences, new opportunities to express maturity, grief, wisdom, tenderness, or restraint. I embraced the wrinkles, the scars, the quiet confidence that comes from decades of craft. I no longer felt the need to prove myself. I wanted only to contribute meaningfully, to give life to stories that resonated. At the same time, I remained committed to the physical discipline required for action films. Martial arts practice, stretching routines, strength training, these became meditative rituals. Maintaining my body wasn't about vanity or pressure, it was about honoring the characters who demanded precision. Action cinema is its own language, and fluency requires respect. Looking back at these years, what strikes me is how interconnected everything became. My roles influenced my personal evolution. My personal experiences shaped my creative choices. Music informed my emotional rhythm. Writing sharpened my introspection. Love softened my outlook. Loss deepened my empathy. Every part of my life fed into the next, forming a tapestry woven from adventure, curiosity, heartbreak, and renewal. And as I prepared to enter the next chapter, one filled with unexpected collaborations, new worlds, and the legacy of the characters who defined me, I understood something essential. Reinvention isn't a dramatic moment. It's a gentle, continuous shift, shaped by the choices we make when no one is watching. As the years moved forward and my body of work continued to grow, I found myself thinking more often about legacy, what it means, how it forms, and whether anyone can truly shape it intentionally. I never entered this industry with dreams of fame, awards, or cultural immortality. My goals were simpler: to act truthfully, to tell stories that stirred something in people, and to build a life grounded in human connection rather than public spectacle. Yet somewhere along the way, audiences began to attach meaning to my choices, my demeanor, and even my silences. It was humbling, strange, and at times overwhelming. Legacy, I discovered, isn't something you declare. It's something others perceive in the quiet accumulation of your actions. The rise of the internet gave me a new relationship with the public. Suddenly, tiny moments, offering my seat on the subway, signing autographs with patience, listening intently to strangers, became symbols people held up as proof of kindness. I didn't consider these gestures noteworthy. They were simply expressions of how I was raised. But the world magnified them, and I realized that in an age of division and digital fatigue, people were searching desperately for examples of simple humanity. Being called wholesome, kind, or the internet's boyfriend didn't make me proud. It made me aware. It reminded me that people often look to public figures not for perfection, but for reassurance that decency still exists. I tried not to let that weight twist into pressure. I'm human. I make mistakes. I feel frustration, sadness, and doubt like anyone else. But if I could offer a little light just by being myself, then I accepted that responsibility quietly. While the world formed opinions about my public persona, my private reflections turned to the characters I had portrayed. Neo, John Wick, Scott Favor, Johnny Utah, Kevin Lomax, Constantine. Each of them lived inside me in different ways, teaching me lessons I didn't expect. Some whispered about destiny, others about loss, resilience, or moral conflict. Characters don't vanish when a shoot wraps. They linger, sometimes for years, shaping your worldview with ideas you didn't realize you needed. John Wick reminded me of perseverance and emotional honesty. Neo taught me to question assumptions and search for truth beneath appearances. Constantine forced me to confront my beliefs about redemption. These characters were not just performances. They became mirrors, reflecting my own evolution. As my connection to these roles deepened, I began to think about the artists who shaped my path. Directors like the Wachowskis, Catherine Bigelow, Gus Van Sant, Francis Lawrence, and Chad Stahelski challenged me to expand beyond comfort. Their trust allowed me to explore vulnerability, physical discipline, and philosophical introspection. Their influence became part of my legacy as well, woven into the performances that audiences remembered. Another part of my legacy formed quietly through philanthropy. I never felt comfortable broadcasting charitable work, but I understood its importance. After witnessing my sister's illness and spending years in hospital corridors, I became committed to supporting cancer research and healthcare facilities. I helped fund children's hospitals, contributed anonymously to medical programs, and placed emphasis on projects that supported families during crises. To me, kindness mattered most when done without applause. Though I rarely spoke about it, I also created opportunities for stunt performers, crew members, and behind-the-scenes artists who deserved recognition. Their dedication often goes unseen, yet they are the backbone of filmmaking. If I could make their work safer, easier, or more valued, I did so gladly. I learned long ago that no actor stands alone. A film's success is the sum of hundreds of skilled contributions. Meanwhile, fans continued shaping their own interpretations of my career. They created art, wrote essays, analyzed characters, produced documentaries, and even built communities inspired by movies I had been part of. Watching the impact of these stories ripple through generations felt surreal. People who weren't born when The Matrix debuted now approached me with reverence, telling me the film changed how they saw the world. Teenagers who knew John Wick before Neo spoke about grief, loyalty, and resilience in ways that made me stop and listen. Their words reminded me that storytelling is a kind of inheritance. What we create becomes part of someone else's inner landscape. That idea both humbled me and anchored me. During this period, I also reflected on the limitations of legacy. I knew that the public image people admired wasn't the full truth. I carried scars, emotional and otherwise. I had lived through heartbreak, loss, and long periods of loneliness. I experienced doubts about my worth, questions about my direction, and fears about the future. But perhaps legacy isn't about presenting perfection. Maybe it's about leaving behind something human, flawed, compassionate, earnest. Through all this introspection, I found comfort in simplicity. I rode my motorcycle at dawn. I cooked meals with Alexandra. I read books that challenged my thinking. I listened to vinyl records until the world outside softened. These moments were my grounding force. They reminded me that living fully mattered more than being remembered. As I entered my next decade of life, I understood that legacy wasn't the climax of a career. It was a conversation between the past and future. It lived in the stories I helped tell, the kindnesses I offered quietly, the relationships I nurtured, and the ways I continued to grow. Legacy, I realized, isn't carved in stone. It breathes, it shifts, it evolves, and mine, whatever shape it eventually takes, will not be defined solely by fame or films, but by the sincerity with which I tried to navigate this unpredictable world. Whenever people ask me what acting means to me, I struggle to give a simple answer. Acting is a profession, yes, but it is also a discipline, a study of humanity, a dance between instinct and technique, and sometimes a form of inner exploration. Over the years, as my career expanded and shifted in unexpected directions, I began thinking deeply about the craft itself, not the business, not the fame, but the quiet, difficult work of bringing a character to life. My relationship with acting evolved slowly. In the beginning, I approached it with raw instinct. I didn't have formal training. I wasn't schooled in classical methods or dramatic theory. I learned by watching, listening, failing, repeating, and paying close attention. Every set became a classroom. Every director became a mentor. Every role became a mirror, reflecting something I hadn't noticed before. As I grew older, I realized that acting is less about pretending and more about revealing. You don't hide behind a character. You discover truths through them. To find those truths, discipline becomes essential. It's not glamorous. It involves hours of preparation, physical conditioning, research, and emotional honesty. Some roles require you to break yourself open. Others ask you to remain still and let subtlety carry the weight. Either way, the process demands commitment. This mindset became especially important when working on physically intense films. Action roles often appear straightforward from the outside: stunts, choreography, dramatic expressions, but beneath the surface lies meticulous discipline. Before John Wick, I believed I understood physical acting. After training with martial artists, stunt coordinators, and weapons specialists, I realized how much I still had to learn. Each technique required repetition until it became second nature. Every movement had to feel authentic, controlled, and emotionally grounded. Pain was part of the journey, but so was joy. The joy of mastering something you once failed at. The satisfaction of performing a sequence that demanded precision and heart. Yet physical training is only one part of the craft. Emotional preparation can be even more demanding. To step into a character's internal world, I often turned to stillness. I learned to sit in silence, breathe deeply, and ask questions that stripped away superficial understanding. What does this character fear? What do they desire? What are their wounds, their hopes, their ghosts? These questions guided me more than any technique. Some characters required me to dig into personal memories, moments of loss, longing, confusion, or resilience. Others asked me to imagine lives completely unlike my own. Either way, I had to remain open to vulnerability. You can't create truth while shielding yourself. That openness often surprised people who assumed action stars carry a certain emotional armor. In reality, emotional sensitivity is a strength, not a weakness. It allows you to inhabit your characters fully. I also learned to appreciate the quiet, technical aspects of filmmaking. Hitting marks, adjusting body angles for lighting, finding your lens, modifying your energy depending on the shot. These details shape a performance more than audiences realize. An actor must be aware of the camera, but not constrained by it. You must remain truthful while navigating a space filled with equipment, crew, and pressure. After decades in the industry, these technical rhythms feel almost instinctive to me. They're like a second language, one I'm grateful to have learned slowly and thoroughly. Another aspect of the craft that I came to cherish is collaboration. No actor performs alone. You rely on scene partners to bring emotional truth, on directors to shape the tone, on writers to build structure, on cinematographers to create atmosphere. When all these elements align, something remarkable happens. The story breathes. You feel it in the room. You sense it in the silence between lines, in the weight of glances, in the resonance of shared imagination. Some of my most memorable moments as an actor came not from dramatic monologues or explosive scenes, but from quiet exchanges where subtlety carried the emotional weight. A character's silence can reveal more than their words. A slight shift in posture can communicate grief, fear, anger, or hope. Acting teaches you to value nuance, to see meaning in small gestures and unspoken emotions. As I reflected on these years, I also understood how acting shaped my personal life. It taught me empathy, the ability to see the world through different eyes. It taught me patience, resilience, and the humility to start from zero with every new role. It taught me curiosity, a willingness to explore unfamiliar worlds, cultures, and beliefs. Above all, it taught me that identity is fluid. We are all many things at once, products of our past, our imagination, our dreams, and our choices. There were moments when I wondered if I had given too much of myself to this profession. The long hours, the emotional intensity, the physical strain, it can be overwhelming. But every time I considered stepping away, I felt the same pull that brought me into acting as a teenager. The desire to tell stories that matter, stories that give people comfort, excitement, hope, or understanding, stories that outlive us. Acting is not a pursuit of perfection. It is a pursuit of truth, and truth, in all its forms, is endlessly interesting. As I moved deeper into this chapter of my life, I realized that the craft had become not just a job, but a philosophy, one that shaped how I saw the world, how I treated others, and how I navigated the inevitable complexities of existence. The older I grew, the more I valued the process over the outcome, the journey over the destination. And though many paths lay ahead, some illuminated, some uncertain, I knew that as long as I remained curious, disciplined, and honest, the art of becoming would continue to guide me forward. As I moved deeper into my 50s, I found myself thinking more often about time, not with fear, but with a kind of quiet fascination. Time is both a teacher and a thief. It sharpens your perspective while gently, inevitably, taking things from you. I felt its presence in the changing lines on my face, in the long exhale after a demanding stunt sequence, in the shifting priorities that guided my choices. But I also felt its generosity, the wisdom that comes from experience, the softening of old wounds, the ability to appreciate moments without chasing them. Mortality has been a familiar companion throughout my life. The losses I've endured, family, friends, a child I never had the chance to hold, etched reminders into the deepest parts of me. But instead of letting those experiences harden me, they shaped a quieter understanding that life's impermanence makes every connection, every joy, every sunrise exponentially more meaningful. When you know how fragile something is, you learn to cherish it with sincerity. I often reflected on how my past sorrows influenced the way I moved through the world. Grief taught me tenderness. It taught me patience. It taught me that healing isn't linear and that some wounds remain open in subtle ways, influencing how you love, work, and rest. But grief also taught me resilience. I learned to stand back up, even when the ground felt unsteady. I learned to hold on to hope, not naively, but courageously, and I learned that peace isn't the absence of pain, it's the presence of understanding. One of the places where I found that peace was in service to others. Throughout my career, I sought to use my resources quietly to support hospitals, cancer research, and organizations that provided care to families in crisis. These acts weren't meant to be public. They were private acknowledgments of the help I wished my loved ones had received sooner, or the support I saw others desperately needing. When you've lived through suffering, empathy becomes a reflex. It becomes a responsibility. The film industry, for all its chaos, also became a space where I explored mortality through storytelling roles like Neo, John Wick, and Constantine confronted death, rebirth, sacrifice, and fate in different ways. These characters weren't fearless. They simply moved forward. Despite their fears, I learned from them. I carried their questions into my own life. Acting gave me the opportunity to process emotions that might have otherwise remained unspoken. Sometimes art allows you to say things your own voice struggles to articulate. At the same time, aging brought a sense of creative liberation. I no longer felt the need to prove myself or chase validation. I chose projects based on curiosity, emotional resonance, or the joy of collaboration. I embraced slower rhythms, thoughtful conversations, and the pleasure of taking my time. I enjoyed long walks, early mornings, and the ritual of making coffee while the sun crept in through the windows. These simple routines grounded me. They reminded me that contentment often hides in the ordinary. My relationship with Alexandra deepened further during these years. Love changes with time, becoming less about intensity and more about presence. We shared ideas, worries, dreams, and laughter that came from the belly rather than the surface. We created art together, supported each other's individuality, and built a shared life that felt honest. I cherish the comfort of a partnership defined not by spectacle, but by mutual respect and gentle care. Meanwhile, I continued pushing my physical limits for roles, understanding that one day I might not be able to throw punches, roll across concrete, or sprint through choreographed chaos with the same endurance. But I embraced that challenge. Training became a form of meditation, one that connected my mind and body in a way few other practices could. I respected my limitations without fearing them. Strength isn't the absence of aging, it's the acceptance of it. Time also deepened my gratitude for simple joys, the warmth of a good meal, the feel of a guitar in my hands, the peace of watching rain fall against a window, the laughter of friends sharing old stories. These ordinary moments became anchors, reminders that life isn't measured in box office numbers, awards, or headlines, but in the quality of the hours we spend with others and with ourselves. I realized that peace isn't something you find once. It's something you cultivate moment by moment with intention. As I reflected on my journey, I began to appreciate the beautiful contradictions of life, how joy and sorrow coexist, how strength and vulnerability complement each other, how love and loss shape the same heart. If mortality teaches anything, It is that every chapter matters, no matter how small it seems at the time. Every person we meet, every path we walk, every risk we take contributes to the mosaic of who we become. And as I stood on the threshold of my later years, I didn't feel fear or regret. I felt curiosity. Life still held stories I hadn't told, places I hadn't seen, and experiences waiting quietly on the horizon. Time may be finite, but meaning isn't. The search for peace isn't a destination, it's a lifelong practice. And with every passing year, I felt more prepared to embrace it. As I look toward the years ahead, I find myself standing at a place that feels strangely familiar, somewhere between uncertainty and possibility, much like the crossroads that defined my youth. Yet the difference now is perspective. Time has softened my urgency, deepened my appreciation, and taught me that life rarely unfolds the way we expect, but often unfolds exactly the way it must. I don't pretend to know what the future holds. I no longer believe in rigid plans or linear paths. Life taught me early that the ground can shift without warning, that joy and sorrow weave themselves into our days with little regard for our expectations. But with age comes the understanding that control is overrated. What matters is presence, being here fully with whatever the moment brings. There are still stories I want to tell, characters I haven't met yet, worlds I'd like to explore on film, but I no longer measure my career by the peaks or valleys. Success doesn't thrill me the way it once did, and failure doesn't scare me. What matters is sincerity. If a role resonates, I'll give myself to it completely. If it doesn't, I'll let it pass without regret. I've learned to honor intuition, even when it leads me down unconventional roads. I also hope to continue collaborating with artists I admire, directors with daring visions, actors who bring honesty to the screen, writers who illuminate human complexity with subtlety and courage. Creativity thrives in community. Some of my most treasured memories come not from premieres or awards, but from laughing with castmates at 3 a.m. between takes, or discussing philosophy with crew members over warm coffee and cold early mornings. Film sets feel like small, temporary families, imperfect but deeply connected by shared purpose. I hope to keep finding those families. Beyond acting, I want to keep exploring other forms of expression. Writing Bars ERKR reminded me how liberating it is to create something from nothing, to shape a world with imagination alone. Music continues to draw me back, especially now that Dogstar has returned in a new era of creativity and camaraderie. There's a rawness to performing live that keeps me humble and awake. I enjoy feeling the pulse of a crowd, not as a celebrity, but as a fellow human sharing sound and emotion. But my ambitions aren't solely tied to work. As the years deepen, I crave balance, time with loved ones, quiet mornings with Alexandra, evenings spent reading or cooking, and long conversations that meander without agenda. I want to nurture the relationships that have sustained me and to be present for the people who matter. I've learned that love grows in the quiet spaces, in listening, in compromise, in laughter that arrives unexpectedly, in the comfort of simply being together. I also hope to keep giving back in ways that feel genuine. The world carries its share of suffering, and while no one person can fix everything, we can ease the load where we're able. Acts of kindness, big or small, create ripples that move farther than we imagine. Whether through philanthropy, advocacy, or simply treating people with fairness, I want the next years of my life to reflect gratitude for the opportunities I've had. Compassion isn't an obligation. It's a way of honoring the humanity in all of us. Spiritually, I remain a seeker. I don't align with one doctrine or philosophy, but I explore ideas that bring clarity or comfort. I believe in mystery, in the interconnectedness of life, in the quiet truths that reveal themselves when we're patient enough to listen. Meditation, solitude, and reflection continue to ground me. They remind me that peace isn't found in the external world. It begins internally, in the willingness to sit with yourself, flaws and all. When I think about aging, I feel neither dread nor denial. Aging is simply another chapter, one with its own beauty. Lines on the face mark years lived. Gray hairs signal wisdom earned. Slower footsteps teach mindfulness. Every stage of life offers lessons, and I welcome them with openness. I don't need to chase youth. I only want to remain engaged with my craft, with people I love, with the curiosities that still spark wonder. I know that one day the roles will become fewer, the stunts harder, the spotlight dimmer. And when that happens, I won't mourn it. I'll accept it as part of the natural rhythm of existence. I'll find new ways to contribute, new ways to express creativity, new ways to experience joy. Reinvention doesn't belong solely to youth. It belongs to anyone willing to embrace change. If I have learned anything worth sharing, it is this. Life is not defined by what you achieve, but by how you move through its chapters, by how you treat others, by how you endure hardship, by how you cherish joy, by how you love despite the risk of loss. My journey has been filled with contradictions, light and shadow, triumph and grief, chaos and serenity. But each moment, each person, each lesson brought me closer to understanding what it means to be alive. As I look toward the horizon, I feel gratitude more than anything. Gratitude for the opportunities I've had, the kindness people have shown me, the stories I've been allowed to tell, and the love that has touched my life in ways that can't be measured. The road ahead remains unwritten, but I'm content with that. Mystery has always been part of my journey, and whatever comes next, whether new roles, new adventures, or new forms of peace, I will greet it the same way I've learned to greet everything, with openness, with humility, and with a heart willing to keep going.